She died very suddenly, though none of us could have known what lay inside her. Her name was Kimmy Wynn, and she was from Korea or Singapore, somewhere like that. We never learned much about Kimmy. Her family didn't speak very good English, though, but Kimmy spoke it well enough to understand the lessons. We tried to befriend her, but Kimmy was shy, and I'm ashamed to say that we took to bullying her. We were in elementary school and extremely cliquey. Kimmy was an outsider. She wore strange clothes. She didn't speak like we did, and we made fun of her for it. Most days, she just sat in the back of class, sat on the pavilion at recess, and said little to nothing. When she died, it surprised everyone. Kimmy lived in a small apartment complex in a not-so-great part of town. Her family worked for her uncle, Mr. June, who owned a market in the neighborhood they lived in. Kimmy had been working there after school, helping her parents pay the bills, and she'd been making a delivery on her bike when someone had abducted her. They found her bike just sitting on the curb, wheels spinning slowly, and the police didn't seem hopeful in their investigations. Her kidnapping was all the buzz around school, and my friends wanted to talk about little else. Marissa, our sort of leader, said she bet that Kimmy had just made the whole thing up so that people would be friends with her after she was found. Leanna said that she shouldn't say things like that, but you could tell she didn't really feel very scandalized. She said she'd be praying for her, praying that they'd find her safe, but even at 10, I doubted it. I kept my mouth shut on the matter, personally thinking it was terrible. No one should just be grabbed off their bike as they tried to help their family. A week later, they found her body in an empty lot near her uncle's shop. Mom wouldn't let me watch the news report about it, but Marissa said that the newsman had said that she was chopped into little pieces and left there. The news thinks it might have been something to do with her uncle, but they don't seem to know much about it. A service was held for her at the local Korean Baptist church, and I saw a picture of her parents lighting a little paper boat and floating it out for her. Her two sisters, one of whom was in the first grade, were there too, and I remember thinking how awful it would be to lose someone like that. My own sister wasn't very nice, but I still didn't want anything like that to happen to her. A few days later, Miss Hurd stopped me as I was going out to recess and asked if I would put the stuff from Kimmy's desk into a box. Her parents are coming at the end of the day, and I really need to be outside with the other children. Just put it on my desk and come outside when you're done. I saw the pack of Marlboros in her hand and guessed that child-minding probably wasn't the only thing on her mind. Marissa stayed to help me, and I found that Kimmy's desk was surprisingly neat. My desk looked like a garage sale, but Kimmy's desk was very organized, and it was easy to pack her stuff away. Marissa cooed over her Hello Kitty pencil box, but I reminded her that we weren't allowed to take her stuff. The pencil box, her notebooks, her folders, and a cute little art supply case went into the box too, along with a Hello Kitty eraser and a pencil set. Marissa looked over it all greedily, but I wasn't trying to get in trouble for taking anything from a dead student, especially not when the teacher had trusted me to pack it. We were loading some of her notebooks when a small purple book fell out of the middle of them. Marissa pounced on it before I could even fully register what it was. I told her to give it back, that it didn't belong to her, but Marissa was already opening it and leafing through it. "Oh, no way! It's her journal! Give it, Marissa, it isn't yours. We need to put it in the box before someone sees it." "No way. No one knows about it, so who's gonna miss it? Unless..." Marissa got a mean look on her face. "You're gonna tattle on me." I stopped complaining then and let her slide the journal into her pocket. Marissa and I had been friends since first grade, but I hadn't forgotten how mean she could be either. She had bullied me in kindergarten for the better part of the first half of the year, until I'd come to school with a brand new backpack one day, and she had fallen in love with it. Marissa had said someone with a backpack that cool had to be friends with her and Leanna, and I had been part of their clique ever since. That had only been 3 years ago, though, and I wasn't in a big hurry to go back to the way things had been. Marissa and I were friends, but Marissa could be mean when she wanted to be. I won't tattle," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "Good," she said, snatching the pencil case out before I could get the lid on. I set the box on the desk, and I made sure that Marissa was out of the classroom before I left. I didn't want her doubling back to grab anything else out of there. The idea to make the Chatterbox was Marissa's, as so many other bad ideas usually were. She read the journal to us at recess, taking delight every time she or Leanna were mentioned. My name came up a few times, though it was usually by association. It appeared that Kimmy had been keeping a journal of people and how they had wronged her, as well as how they had wronged others. Quite the little spider was Kimmy, hiding away and listening to people as they gossiped or went about their lives. Marissa said, getting a mischievous look. I've got an idea. She turned to the back and tore out an unused page, beginning to write the predictions for her Chatterbox. If you're unfamiliar with the item, it's probably because it has a million names. I've heard them called fortune tellers, whirlybirds, paku-paku, salt sellers, cootie catchers, and any number of other things. Sometimes when I post about them online, I get little fights started over what they're called. People have 1,000 different names for them, but they seem to be something known worldwide. They are little devices that you put numbers in, picking numbers randomly until you get your fortunes and learn your fate. Marissa had already started writing the same old things she always wrote on the wedges anytime she made one of these. They were never very creative, usually things like you'd marry a millionaire, that you'd be a princess, that you'd have 20 children, that sort of thing. She was always very predictable, but she never seemed to include anything bad in her predictions. Marissa, despite being a bit of a brat, didn't like for bad things to happen to her or her friends. When she made the Chatterbox, it was always the best outcomes. Okay, pick a number. I looked at the Chatterbox questioningly. What are you doing? Isn't it obvious? If Kimmy knew so many secrets, then maybe she won't mind telling us our future. The idea of using a dead girl's paper to tell our fortunes made me shudder, and I shook my head as she turned to Leanna. Come on, Lee, let me tell your future. I guess it couldn't hurt, Leanna said. 5. Marissa opened and closed the device very fast, before holding out for her to pick another number. 7, she said, smiling a little as the paper creature plopped open and closed very quickly. 3, she finished, and Marissa opened the flap. You should tell Jana what you... But Marissa stopped suddenly. She seemed to realize that she had read words before she had quite put together what they had said. Tell Jana what? Leanna said, smiling but looking a little nervous. Marissa looked at me. Did you write something on this while I wasn't looking? No. When would I have had a chance? Marissa started to call me a liar, but she huffed out a hey as Leanna took the Chatterbox and looked at the tab. She looked confused when she got the Chatterbox away from her, but she looked angry after she read what was on the tab. You should tell Jana what you did to Mark at the lake. She tossed the little paper thing in Marissa's lap. I told you that in confidence. I only kissed him because you said that I should. Lee, I didn't write that. But Leanna was already storming away, heading for the picnic tables. Marissa looked back at me, holding the paper craft out as though inviting me to take my turn. I don't really want to do it. It feels kind of creepy. Oh my God, Marissa groaned, deep in her throat. Here, I'll do it. She picked numbers at random, moving her fingers very quickly as she selected her fortune. Marissa looked mad, furious even, but that didn't seem to stop her from selecting numbers and finding out what her fortune might be. The fortune that Leanna had read had shocked her, and she was interested in finding the ones that she had written so she could feel okay again. It was a fluke, she must be thinking, and now she was going to prove it. She opened tab number 3, and I could see her hands shaking as she read it. Felicia doesn't like you. She pretended to because her mom asked her to. She looked at me suspiciously, but I just put my hands up and looked at the words inside. It's not even either of our handwritings. Your handwriting is swoopy, and mine is super sloppy. This handwriting is way too neat to be either of ours. Marissa looked at the handwriting, and then flipped open the journal as if looking for the source of it. She stared at a few of the pages before slamming the book shut and taking the Chatterbox with her. I asked her where she was going, but she didn't answer. Turns out she was going on a tour of the playground. I didn't realize what was going on until a group of angry kids approached the playground monitor with a frantic Marissa in tow. The lead girl, Felicia Spaulding, looked livid, and Marissa was trying to tell her how sorry she was with every step she took. Miss Conway, Marissa's telling lies about my friends and me. Miss Conway, a broad, beefy, grandmotherly woman with hands like slabs of meat, looked at Marissa and then back to Felicia. What's going on, girls? What's this about lies? I didn't write it, Marissa wailed, waving the Chatterbox with her free hand. She wrote lies about us in her Chatterbox. Her box said that my mom had gotten an abortion and that Cindy was adopted. Cindy, the tall girl with the wavy brown hair that hung with Felicia in her clique, was crying and shaking her head. Other kids had similar stories. Some said that her Chatterbox had told them that their parents were getting divorced. Others said that it had said it knew things that they had done or things they had said. One of them even claimed that it told him that his aunt would die later that week and that she was in the hospital with cancer. Marissa, hand that thing over, Miss Conway said, her face growing dour as she listened to the long list of complaints against Marissa. Marissa gave her the folded paper, both hesitant and loath to be rid of it, and she almost cried out in anguish as Miss Conway tore it into pieces. Next time I hear of something like this, I'll give you after-school detention. Stop writing lies about people, and the rest of you go play. They all dispersed, Marissa looking down at the pieces of the Chatterbox as they drifted in the wind. I hadn't walked up with the rest, but I was still close enough to hear Felicia tell her not to expect to go to any of her parties anymore. Marissa changed after that, and it seemed to me that the Chatterbox was the reason for it. For the rest of the day, she just sat at her desk and looked down at her lap. I couldn't see what she was fiddling with at first, but eventually I saw it was another one of the Chatterboxes. I was shocked. Hadn't she learned her lesson after the first one? Her book was open, but her hands moved below the lip of the desk in a rapid series of jerks and swoops. She would flick it once, twice, 3 times before opening the corresponding flap and reading what it said. Every answer seemed to make her more and more agitated. She would take it off her hands sometimes and seemed on the verge of ripping it to shreds before gently sliding it back on and starting again. Marissa, would you care to answer number 4 for us? Miss Hurd asked, drawing my attention back to the front of the class and drawing Marissa out of her stupor. Marissa shoved the Chatterbox under her desk and looked down at her open textbook as she searched for number 4. 17? Miss Hurd blinked. That would be correct if we were still on our math lesson. We've moved on to geography. Are you feeling well, Marissa? You don't seem like yourself today. Marissa turned beet red, digging through her desk to find her book. Miss Hurd had approached her desk, I suppose wanting to see if she might be feverish, and when she stooped to pick something up, I saw that the Chatterbox had tumbled out of her desk as Marissa looked for her book. Oh, what have we here? I remember these from when I was a little girl. We used to use them to tell each other's fortunes. I can't believe kids still make these for... But as she had been talking, she had opened one of the flaps on the Chatterbox. She glanced at the tab as it came fully open, and her words ended as abruptly as they had begun. Marissa looked up at her as her geography book came open, and the look on her face was enough to tell me that she didn't like what she saw there. Get up, Miss Hurd whispered, her voice barely containing her rage. Miss Hurd? Marissa asked, unsure what was happening. Get your... She curbed her next words. Things, and come with me. We're going straight to the principal's office, young lady. Marissa looked up, confused, but collected her things and went with Miss Hurd to the office. She never came back to class, and when I asked Miss Hurd, she only told me that her mother had been called after something she had written in the Chatterbox. Marissa was suspended for 5 days. She was taken out of class and put in another 4th grade class, away from Leanna and I. Leanna said it served her right for writing lies about people. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it. I would have honestly forgiven her, but not after what she said about Miss Hurd. I asked her what she had said, and Leanna leaned in like it was some big secret. I heard that she had written that Miss Hurd was cheating on her husband with Mr. Sizemore. The PE teacher? Yeah, can you imagine? She's lucky she didn't get expelled. When Marissa came back to school, she was a very different girl. She looked frazzled, her red hair looking unkempt. She seemed to be constantly pulling at her clothes. She was nervous and twitchy, and she seemed obsessed with the little Chatterbox. She would ask people to pick a space, ask them to make a choice, but most people would just walk past her without speaking. It's tough to be labeled a social pariah at 10 years old. She had lost all of her friends, except for me, and I wasn't even sure I still wanted to be her friend. When I saw her at recess that day, sitting by the fence and fiddling with the Chatterbox, I sat beside her and asked if she was okay. I could smell a smell around her, and it wasn't an altogether healthy smell. "I can't let her beat me," she whispered, her face very close to the Chatterbox as she worked the mechanism. "Who?" I asked. "Kimmy," she said, just as low, and when she opened the fold on the Chatterbox, she sobbed and closed it again before starting. "Mara, Kimmy's dead," I said, using her nickname to try to bring her back to her senses. "Not all the way dead," she said, and when she opened the tab this time, her fingers crumpled the space, and I could read the message written there just before she closed it. "Your mother thinks you're crazy." Marissa pushed me suddenly, and the fence scratched my back as I slid sideways. Through the tears that welled in my eyes, I could see her lunatic's face as she pushed it inches from mine. "That's not your fortune. Don't read other people's fortunes." Miss Conway must have seen something, because she started walking over. I got up and walked away quickly, not looking at Marissa as the playground monitor approached her. That was the last time I spoke to Marissa, but not the last time I saw her. For the next 3 months, I saw her on and off. She became like a wraith who haunted the school. She stopped asking people to look at the Chatterbox. She just sat off by herself and played with it, cringing and sobbing every time she opened a flap. The more I saw her, the worse I felt for her, and eventually I decided to try and bury the hatchet. I decided that after school I would go visit her at home and try to see if we could reconcile. I also wanted to see if there was any sanity left in her to save. She hadn't been at school the last couple of days, not that anyone but me had bothered to notice. When I arrived at her house, her mother seemed happy to see me. She told me that Marissa had been feeling poorly lately, and that maybe a friend might cheer her up. Marissa's mother looked like she hadn't slept in a few days, and even at 10, I noticed that she approached Marissa's room like there might be a wild animal behind the door. She knocked, slow and hesitant, and told Marissa that I was here to see her. Marissa said nothing. She knocked again, asking if Marissa was awake. Marissa said nothing. Her mother opened the door slowly, and I could see Marissa sitting at the desk with her back to the door. She never moved when her mother walked over to her, and as I stood in the doorway, I couldn't help but take in what appeared to be the lair of a crazy person. Some of the details would come to me afterward, but many of them were seen in the split second that we often use to see details and assess if a person is a threat or not. The floor was full of chatterboxes, like a flower bed of folded paper, and her mother seemed to be stepping over them gingerly. The outside of them were covered with words, all of them written in that neat, spidery handwriting. The writing on the wall was all Marissa's, though. She had written on the wall in anything she could find. The scrawls were a messy jumble of pen, pencil, paint, charcoal, and even rusty red colors that might have been her own blood in a few places. The words were strange, not making a lot of sense. She watches. She whispers. She tells me I'm crazy. I'm insane. I'm a disappointment. She haunts me. Most chilling of all was the rusty red smear of the word Kimmy over the head of her bed, like she had traced it with a bleeding finger. When her mother started to scream, I was turned away from the bloody words as if someone had slapped me. She was screaming Marissa's name again and again, shaking the ragged scarecrow that she had become. She begged me to dial 911, and I ran downstairs to do just that. The paramedics couldn't figure it out. They said it was like her heart had just stopped, and no amount of CPR or defibrillation could bring her back. As they laid her out on the ground, I could see her face frozen in a rictus of fear and shock. Looking to the desk, I saw the chatterbox she had been toting around. It was grimy, covered in fingerprints, but I believe to this day that it was the same one that Miss Conway had destroyed all those weeks ago. The open flap was blank, the surface stark and unmarred. I can't imagine what she could have read there, and I honestly didn't want to find out. I'm in high school now. 8 years have passed, but I still remember the lesson I learned from Marissa. It's unwise to mess around with the possessions of the dead. Their things are better left undisturbed, their memories left unread. It was the last lesson Marissa would ever learn, and she learned it too late. If it's a lesson I ever forget, I have a reminder on my desk every day. You see, when I came home from Marissa's funeral, the Chatterbox was sitting on my doorstep. I can't prove it was the same one. I know that it can't be the same one, but that didn't stop me from scooping it up and putting it in my pocket before my mother could see it. I heard it whisper to me that night. Its whispering is little more than a mutter as I sit here writing. It's harder to hear, but it never goes away. That's why I refuse to touch it, let alone use it. Let Marissa and Kimmy keep each other company inside that thing for the rest of time, for all I care. I don't want the knowledge they hold that badly. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Now, when I was a kid, we always called them fortune tellers, but the internet has informed me that they have many, many different names, and Chatterbox just seemed to be the most fitting one for the story, if I do say so myself. I look forward to seeing many of you argue in the comments section about what you called them when you were younger. But right up there with paper footballs and those little paper witch fingers, fortune tellers were just about the most common thing to see in my elementary school when I was a kid. Well, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors before we leave. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronana for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributor. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghostwriter tier contributor. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. Patrons of any level also get their story a day early, so come on down and get your spooky on a Tuesday or a Thursday. I've got a book coming out next month, so I highly recommend the Ghostly Reader tier contributor. That way you get a signed copy on your doorstep as soon as I publish. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.